Midnight patrol. Dead quiet. The rain wasn't water. It was a chemical hiss that slicked the permacrete and corroded the steel grates of the Undercity. Rorik moved through it like a ghost made of wet leather and Kevlar. His world was Sector 9, a vertical slum of rusted shipping containers welded into a honeycomb of misery, lit by the flickering neon of noodle bars and synth clinics. He kept the peace, or what passed for it. A boot stamping on a throat here, a cracked skull there. The corporate peacekeepers didn't come down this far. This was his patch of rot, a sound cut through the drizzle. Not the usual shriek of a juicer getting shanked for his last credit chip. This was different. The high-frequency crackle of military-grade plasma fire, followed by a grunt of pain that wasn't entirely human. Rorik's hand went to the heavy pistol holstered on his thigh. He moved toward the sound, boots silent on the grimy pavement. Down a narrow alley choked with overflowing refuse bins and the stink of synth oil and piss. He saw them. 3 figures in black tactical armor, unmarked. Private military. The kind of scum Corps hired for jobs too dirty for their own enforcers. They had someone cornered against the brick wall of a defunct protein factory. Her. She was tall, impossibly so. Her skin had a faint, pearlescent sheen under the sputtering sodium lamps, a canvas of pale lavender swirled with deep indigo markings that seemed to shift like oil on water. She wore a torn, dark tunic that did little to hide a physique that was all lean, corded muscle. Her face was sharp, angular, with high cheekbones and eyes that glowed with a soft, internal silver light. And she was bleeding. A dark, viscous fluid, almost black, seeped from a gash on her side. In her hand, she held a whip. It wasn't leather. It was a filament of pure, contained energy that hummed with lethal intent. One of the mercs lunged. She moved with a speed that blurred the eye. The energy whip cracked, a sound like tearing reality, and it sliced through the merc's plasma rifle, sending sparks showering onto the wet ground. He staggered back, cursing. Another one fired. She twisted, the plasma bolt searing the air where she'd been a microsecond before. But she was flagging. Her movements were a fraction too slow, her stance unsteady from the blood loss. They were wearing her down. Rorik had a choice. Walk away. This wasn't his business. Aliens, mercs, corporate wetwork. A recipe for a short, messy life. He watched her grit her teeth, her silver eyes blazing with a defiance that was almost painful to witness. She was a cornered queen, a fallen goddess in a trash-filled alley. And she was going to die here. Rorik sighed. A quiet, tired sound lost in the rain. His pistol was in his hand before he consciously decided to draw it. He raised the weapon, the heavy-duty suppressor doing little to muffle the distinctive subsonic thud. The first merc, the one with the bisected rifle, was turning to his squad leader. Rorik's shot took him in the helmet's unarmored neck seal. The man dropped like a sack of wet synth meat. No sound, just a dead weight hitting the pavement. The other 2 spun around, raising their weapons. Too slow. Rorik was already moving, a dark shape detaching from the deeper shadows. He fired twice more. Thud, thud. The second merc's helmet visor spiderwebbed, then blew inward. The third caught a round in the chest plate. It was heavy armor, military spec. The bullet didn't penetrate, but the kinetic force was immense. The merc staggered back, breath driven from his lungs, his aim thrown off. Rorik closed the distance in 3 long strides. He slammed the butt of his pistol into the side of the merc's helmet, a solid, cracking sound of plasti steel giving way. The man went down. Rorik didn't wait to see if he'd get up. He kicked the plasma rifle away, the weapon clattering into a pool of oily water. The alley fell silent again, save for the hiss of the rain and the low hum of the alien's energy whip. He turned. She was still pressed against the wall, but her stance had shifted. The whip was now pointed at him. Her silver eyes were narrowed, suspicious. I had them, she said. Her voice was a low contralto, with a strange, resonant quality, like a cello string vibrating in a stone chamber. Rorik holstered his pistol. Sure you did, he said, his own voice a gravelly monotone. He took a step closer. The whip cracked the air an inch from his face. The heat of it singed his skin. He didn't flinch. I don't need help from primitives, she hissed. Her pride was a tangible thing, a shield as real as the armor on the dead men at his feet. You're bleeding out, Rorik stated. It wasn't an observation. It was a verdict. He could see the dark stain on her tunic spreading, the slight tremor in the hand that held the whip. Her defiant expression faltered for a barest fraction of a second. "Enough. I am fine," she insisted, her voice tight with pain. Rorik ignored her. He moved forward, fast. She tried to bring the whip around, but he was already inside its arc. He grabbed her wrist. Her skin was cool to the touch, smooth as polished stone. Her grip was incredibly strong. For a moment, it was a standoff. His calloused human hand against her slender, powerful one. He saw the surprise in her eyes, quickly masked by fury. "Let go of me," she commanded. Rorik used his other hand to press 2 fingers against the nerve cluster on the inside of her elbow. An old military trick. Her fingers went numb, and the energy whip deactivated, its light fading into the handle. It dropped from her grasp. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Before she could react, before her fury could translate into another attack, he scooped her up into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, but dense, solid. A body built for combat and command. She let out an enraged cry and struggled, hammering a fist against his Kevlar-vested chest. It was like being hit with a small rock. "Put me down," she snarled, her breath hot against his neck. "No," he said simply. He turned and started walking back the way he came, leaving the bodies for the sanitation drones to mulch. Her struggles weakened. He felt her go tense, then a shudder ran through her frame. She went limp against him, her head falling against his shoulder. She hadn't fainted from weakness. She had fainted from sheer, stubborn blood loss. Rorik adjusted her weight in his arms and kept walking. The rain continued to fall, washing the blood from the alley, erasing the moment as if it had never happened. His building was just another concrete monolith, indistinguishable from the dozens around it. The lobby smelled of boiled cabbage and despair. The elevator was broken, as always. He took the stairs, all 24 flights. He didn't break a sweat. His apartment was on the top floor. A single room. A concrete box. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. The place was Spartan. A cot against one wall, a small workbench covered in disassembled electronics and weapon parts, a single weapons locker bolted to the floor. No decorations. No comfort. Just function. He laid her down on the cot. Her breathing was shallow. The dark fabric of her tunic was now soaked through at her side. He grabbed a blade from his workbench. With practiced efficiency, he cut away the torn material, exposing the wound. It was ugly. A deep gash, seared at the edges by a plasma bolt, but weeping dark, purple-black blood. It needed to be sealed. He went to a small, battered footlocker at the base of his cot and pulled out a military-grade medkit. He pulled out a dermal regenerator and a pack of coagulant foam. As he turned back to her, her eyes snapped open. Silver fire in the dim light of the room. She tried to sit up, a snarl on her lips. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, pushing her back onto the cot. She was weak, but her strength was still considerable. She strained against his hand, her muscles taut. "What are you doing to me?" she demanded, her voice raspy. "Saving your life," he said, "so you can go back to trying to get yourself killed somewhere else." He brought the dermal regenerator close to the wound. It whined as it powered up. "This is going to hurt," he warned. He didn't wait for a reply. He pressed the device against her skin. She screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of agony that echoed in the small room. Her back arched off the cot, her hands clawing at the thin mattress. The smell of burning flesh and ozone filled the air. Rorik held her down, his expression unchanging, his jaw tight. He worked with a detached focus, sealing the torn muscle and skin layer by layer. When he was done, the gash was replaced by a patch of raw, pinkish new tissue. He sprayed it with the coagulant foam, which hissed as it hardened into a protective seal. He pulled back. She lay gasping on the cot, sweat beading on her brow. Her silver eyes were locked on his, filled with a mixture of pain, hatred, and something else he couldn't quite decipher. He tossed the spent medical supplies onto his workbench. He grabbed a canteen of water and a clean rag. He sat on the edge of the cot, a concession to her state. He soaked the rag and began to gently wipe the sweat and grime from her face. Her skin was surprisingly soft beneath the warrior's hardness. She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. She was watching him, assessing him. Her gaze was intense, analytical. "Why?" she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. Rorik stopped wiping her face. He looked at her, really looked at her. The intricate markings on her skin seemed to pulse with a faint light, synchronized with her heartbeat. "You were a problem in my sector," he said, repeating his earlier thought. It was a half-truth. The real reason was something he didn't have the words for. Something about the way she fought, the sheer, indomitable will in her eyes. It had reminded him of someone, of something he'd lost a long time ago. She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. "I am not a problem," she said, her voice regaining some of its regal authority. "I am Xylia." She said the name as if it should mean something to him, as if it should shatter worlds. It meant nothing. "Rorik," he supplied, his tone flat. A name for a name. A tense silence settled between them. He finished cleaning her face and stood up. He offered her the canteen. She stared at it for a long moment before taking it with a shaky hand. She drank greedily, the water spilling down her chin. He turned away, giving her a semblance of privacy. He started cleaning his pistol, the familiar, methodical movements calming his frayed nerves. "What do you want from me?" Xylia asked from the cot. Rorik didn't look up from his work. "Nothing," he said. "Rest. Heal. Then get out." "It is not that simple," she said. "They will be looking for me. They will not stop." "Not my problem," he replied, sliding the magazine back into his pistol with a solid click. "You made it your problem when you interfered," she countered. He finally looked at her. She was right. He had crossed a line. There was no going back. "Then we have a problem," he said. The standoff lasted for 3 days. 3 days of her confined to the cot, her body healing at an unnatural rate, and him watching her from the other side of the room. They barely spoke. The silence was a battlefield, filled with unspoken questions and challenges. He brought her nutrient paste, the same gray sludge he ate every day. She ate it without complaint, her silver eyes never leaving him. He could feel her gaze on him even when his back was turned. It was like being watched by a predator. A beautiful, wounded predator. On the 3rd day, she stood up. She was still stiff, her movements careful, but the weakness was gone. She walked around the small room, examining his belongings with a critical eye. She picked up a heavy wrench from his workbench. "Your life is Spartan," she observed, testing the weight of the tool. "It's functional," he replied, watching her hand on the wrench. She put it down. "You are a warrior," she stated. "A soldier." "I was," he said. "What happened?" she asked, her gaze sharp. "I got tired of taking orders," he lied. She tilted her head, a gesture that was distinctly non-human. "Liar," she said softly. Before he could respond, there was a heavy, metallic knock on his door. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was the sound of authority. Rorik's blood went cold. He looked at Xylia. Her eyes were wide, her body tensed like a coiled spring. "They found us," she whispered. "Get in there," Rorik commanded, pointing to a small, almost invisible panel in the wall. "A maintenance crawl space." "I will not hide like a frightened grub," she hissed. "Get in there now," he repeated, his voice a low growl. "And be silent." He drew his pistol. For a heartbeat, he thought she would refuse. Then, with a look of pure venom directed at him, she moved to the panel, opened it, and slipped inside the cramped, dark space. Rorik closed the panel just as the knocking came again, louder this time. "Open up. Corporate enforcement." A voice boomed through the metal door. Rorik took a deep breath, holstered his weapon, and walked to the door. He opened it a crack. 2 men stood in the hallway, clad in the sleek, white armor of Genesis Corporation's elite enforcers. Their helmets were polarized, hiding their faces. "Can I help you?" Rorik asked, his voice deliberately weary, annoyed. "We're conducting a sector sweep," the lead enforcer said, his voice tinny through his helmet speaker. "We have reports of a non-Terran hostile in this block. Have you seen anything unusual?" Rorik leaned against the doorframe, projecting an air of bored indifference. "Unusual is the baseline down here," he said with a slight shrug. "You're going to have to be more specific." The enforcer held up a datapad. A holographic image of Xylia shimmered in the dim hallway. It was a formal portrait. She wore elaborate, regal attire, her expression proud and commanding. She looked like a queen. The enforcer said. Tall. Markings like these. Hostile and extremely dangerous. Rorik stared at the image for a long moment. This was his chance. He could tell them. Point to the panel in the wall. End this. Go back to his quiet, empty life. He looked from the hologram to the enforcer's blank helmet. He thought of the defiance in her eyes in that alley. He thought of the agony on her face as he'd sealed her wound. He thought of her calling him a liar. "Haven't seen anyone like that," he said, his voice even. The decisive lie. It hung in the air between them, a solid, irrevocable thing. The enforcer stared at him, the helmet's optical sensors glowing a faint red. Rorik met the unseen gaze without blinking. "We have reason to believe she may be injured," the second enforcer added. "We detected a spike of unregistered medical tech originating from this floor 3 nights ago." "That was me," Rorik said smoothly. "Had a run-in with some scavs over a power cell. Patch myself up." He gestured vaguely to his side. It was a plausible story in this part of the city. The lead enforcer was silent for a long moment. Rorik could feel Xylia's presence behind the wall, a silent, tense weight. "We'll need to search your residence," the enforcer finally said. "You got a warrant for that?" Rorik asked, his tone hardening slightly. The enforcer's hand drifted toward his sidearm. "This is a Tier 1 security directive from Genesis Corp. That's all the warrant we need down here," he said. Rorik didn't move. He just stared at the enforcer. He let the silence stretch. Let them feel the weight of what they were trying to do. He was just one man in a slum apartment. But something in his stance, in his dead, cold eyes, gave them pause. "Look," Rorik said, breaking the silence. "I don't know who you're looking for, and I don't care. I keep my head down. I don't cause trouble. Search my place if you want. Tear it apart. But if you find nothing, you put it back exactly as you found it." He stepped back from the door, opening it wide. An invitation. A gamble. The enforcers exchanged a look. They could see the entire apartment from the doorway. The cot, the workbench, the locker. Nowhere to hide. Except for the one place they wouldn't think to look. The lead enforcer scanned the room, his helmet's sensors sweeping over every surface. The crawlspace panel was flush with the wall, covered in the same grime and stains as the rest of the concrete. It was invisible unless you knew it was there. The scan revealed nothing. "All right," the enforcer said, his voice laced with suspicion. "We're clear here. But if you see her, you report it. The bounty is substantial." "I'll keep that in mind," Rorik said. The enforcers turned and left, their heavy boots echoing down the hallway. Rorik waited until the sound faded completely before closing and locking his door. He leaned against it, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He walked to the panel and opened it. Xylia unfolded herself from the cramped space. She stood before him, her expression unreadable. "You lied for me," she said. "It wasn't a question. They were a problem in my sector," he said, deflecting. She took a step closer to him. The small room suddenly felt even smaller. "They showed me your picture," he said, his voice low. "You clean up nice." A flicker of something, annoyance, amusement, crossed her face. "That was my coronation portrait," she said. "I am Xylia, matriarch in exile of the Cathar sovereign." Rorik absorbed the information without expression. "Queen." He'd saved a queen. "Genesis Corporation wants you dead," he stated. "No," she corrected him. "Genesis Corporation wants what I possess. My sister, Zora, wants me dead. She has made a pact with these corporate scavengers. They hunt me for her in exchange for the rights to our ancestral lands. Betrayal. Family. It was a story as old as time, just with aliens and corporations. You have put yourself in great danger for a stranger, Rorik, she said, her silver eyes searching his face. Looks like it, he said. The dynamic between them had shifted. He had chosen a side, her side, and in doing so, he had painted a target on his own back. That night, the silence in the room was different. It was no longer a battlefield. It was a shared space, a fragile truce. He gave her the cot. He took the floor, a thin blanket his only comfort. He lay in the dark, listening to the sound of her breathing. He was a fool. He had thrown away his quiet, solitary existence for a woman he didn't know, a cause that wasn't his. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but the image of her face, proud and defiant, was burned into the back of his eyelids. The next day, a fever took her, a delayed reaction to the injury and the alien biology fighting off terrestrial infection. She tossed and turned on the cot, muttering in her own language. Her skin was hot to the touch. Rorik did what he could. He kept her cool with damp rags, forced water between her lips. In her delirium, the walls of her formidable pride crumbled. She spoke of starfields and obsidian palaces. She cried out names he didn't recognize. My clutch. she whispered once, her voice filled with a profound, aching loss. All gone. All dust. He saw the queen then, stripped of her armor and her anger. He saw the woman who had lost everything. He sat by the cot, watching over her, a silent guardian in the dim light. He found himself absently tracing the indigo markings on her arm. They felt like fine tattoos, embedded deep in her skin. He pulled up his own shirt, looking at the ragged, puckered scar tissue that covered a large portion of his chest. A souvenir from his last military operation. The one that had gotten him honorably discharged and sent to this gutter. The one where he had been the sole survivor. He understood loss. He understood being the last one standing. He laid his hand over the scar, a familiar, phantom pain echoing through him. He looked back at Xylia, her face serene in her fevered sleep. A crack in his own armor. A flicker of empathy he hadn't felt in years. By morning, the fever had broken. She woke up weak but clear-headed. She saw him sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, asleep. His pistol lay on his lap. She watched him for a long time. The hard lines of his face seemed softer in sleep. She remembered fragments of the night. His cool hand on her forehead. His quiet presence. When he finally stirred and opened his eyes, he found her staring at him. "You stare," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "You are interesting to look at," she replied, her tone neutral. The tension was back, but it had changed. It was no longer just the friction of two warriors sizing each other up. It was something else. Something deeper, more volatile. The small apartment seemed to shrink with every passing hour. They moved around each other in a careful dance of avoidance. A brush of shoulders in the narrow space between the cot and the workbench. A shared glance held a fraction of a second too long. The air grew thick, charged with unspoken things. "You think I don't see it?" she said one afternoon, her voice a low challenge. She stood by the workbench, her hand resting near the handle of her deactivated energy whip. Rorik was cleaning a rifle. He didn't look up. "See what?" "The way you watch me," she said. "Like a specimen. Like a prize." He stopped his work and slowly raised his head. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "I watch you because I don't trust you," he said. "And because in this room, you're the only thing that's not gray concrete." It was the most honest thing he had said to her. She took a step toward him. "And what do you see?" she pressed, her silver eyes demanding an answer. He stood up, his full height shadowing her. They were inches apart. He could smell the strange, alien scent of her skin, something like ozone and night-blooming flowers. "I see trouble," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You are not afraid of trouble," she countered, her gaze dropping to his lips. "I'm not afraid of anything," he said. It was a lie, and she knew it. "Liar," she whispered, echoing her words from days before. And then the argument started. A stupid, pointless argument about their next move. He wanted to lay low, gather intel. She wanted to strike back, to find a way to contact her loyalists. It was a clash of his cautious, pragmatic nature against her fiery, royal impatience. The words grew heated, voices rising in the confined space. "You will listen to me," she finally snarled, her frustration boiling over. "I am the one being hunted, and I'm the one keeping you alive," he shot back. "You'll do what I say." "I will not," she shoved him hard. Rorik stumbled back a step, surprised by her strength. His anger, a cold, controlled thing he usually kept locked down tight, flared. He grabbed her, his hands closing on her upper arms. He spun her around and pinned her against the cold concrete wall. Her back hit the wall with a solid thud. She gasped, her eyes wide with shock and fury. She struggled against his grip, a wildcat trapped. "Let me go," she panted, her face inches from his. "No," he growled, his control slipping. And then it happened. The anger in her eyes faltered, replaced by something else. The same raw need he felt coiling in his own gut. The fight went out of her. Her body went pliant against his. His grip on her arms loosened, his hands sliding up to cup her face. He stared into her silver eyes, and for the first time, he saw not a queen or a warrior, but just a woman. A woman who was as lost and alone as he was. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision, a desperate, angry claiming. It was the release of days of tension, fear, and a burning, unwanted attraction. She responded with equal ferocity, her hands coming up to clutch at his shirt, pulling him closer. Her lips were soft, But her kiss was demanding, a challenge. He lifted her off her feet, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her the few steps to the cot. He fell with her onto the thin mattress, their bodies a tangle of limbs and raw, desperate need. It was a surrender, a mutual annihilation of the walls they had so carefully built around themselves. Afterward, they lay in the dark, the sounds of the city's endless night filtering through the window. The silence was different again, charged, intimate. That was unexpected, Xylia said, her voice rough, her body still intertwined with his. Rorik stared at the cracked ceiling. His heart was still hammering against his ribs. Don't get used to it, he said, the words automatic, a defense mechanism. But his hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers lacing through hers. Her grip was strong, certain. This changes nothing, he said, trying to convince himself. It changes everything, she replied, and he knew she was right. The next morning, everything did change. It started with a low whistle, the sound of a breaching charge being armed outside his door. Rorik was on his feet in an instant, naked and alert. He shoved Xylia off the cot. Get dressed. Move, he commanded, already pulling on his own clothes and strapping on his gear. The explosion was deafening. The metal door blew off its hinges, flying across the room and embedding itself in the far wall. White-armored Genesis enforcers poured into the room, plasma rifles raised. Freeze, one of them yelled. Rorik didn't freeze. He grabbed the heavy rifle he'd been cleaning and opened fire. The room erupted in a storm of plasma bolts and kinetic rounds. Concrete dust filled the air. Xylia, now dressed, activated her energy whip. It cracked to life, a slash of brilliant light in the chaos. She moved like a dancer of death, her whip disarming one enforcer, its tip wrapping around another's throat. Rorik provided covering fire, his shots precise, methodical. Headshots, center mass. They were a team, a fluid, deadly unit born of instinct and desperation. But there were too many of them. The window, Rorik yelled over the din of battle. He grabbed a spare power cell from his workbench and threw it at the remaining enforcers. He shot it midair. The resulting explosion sent a wave of force through the room, knocking the enforcers off their feet. It bought them seconds. Rorik shattered the reinforced window with the butt of his rifle. 24 stories down to the grimy street. You've got to be joking, Xylia said, looking at the drop. No time. Rorik grabbed a coil of high-tensile wire from his locker and clipped one end to a support beam. He threw the other end out the window. Go, he yelled, shoving her toward the opening. She didn't hesitate. She swung out into the rain-swept air, her powerful form rappelling down the side of the building with practiced ease. Rorik fired a few more rounds back into the ruined apartment, then followed her out the window. He slid down the wire, the friction burning his gloved hands. Plasma bolts sizzled past him, striking the side of the building. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Xylia was already there, her whip in hand, guarding their landing zone. This way, he grunted, grabbing her arm and pulling her into a narrow alley. His sanctuary was gone. His quiet life was a smoking ruin. They were fugitives. They ran down into the guts of the city. The service tunnels, the abandoned subway lines, the vast, echoing sewer systems. It was Rorik's territory. He knew the darkness, the forgotten paths. He led them through a labyrinth of dripping pipes and rusting gantries. Xylia followed without question. Her non-human senses were an asset in the pitch blackness. She could see in the infrared spectrum, could hear the faintest sounds. 2 hostiles, 50 meters ahead. She would whisper, and he would change their course. They moved in silence, a shared purpose uniting them. They found refuge in an old, abandoned subway station. The air was stale, thick with the dust of decades. They built a small fire in a rusted barrel, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the tiled walls. They sat across from each other, exhausted, grimy, but alive. It was there, in the quiet dark, that she told him the full story. Zora was always the ambitious one, Xylia began, her voice low, her gaze fixed on the flames. I was the warrior, the protector. She was the politician. She craved power. Rorik listened, cleaning his weapons, his hands never still. Our people, the Cathar, we are tied to our homeworld. Not just by sentiment, but by biology. There are sacred sites, places of great power, that regulate our life cycles, our very genetics. She paused, a shadow passing over her face. Zora made a deal with your Genesis Corporation. She sold them the mining rights to those sites. For technology, for weapons, for the power to usurp me. What kind of mining? Rorik asked. They are harvesting a rare isotope that is a byproduct of the geothermal energies at our sites. An isotope that is slowly poisoning our world. And our people. Genocide for profit. It was a very human story. When I discovered her betrayal, I confronted her. She tried to have me assassinated. I fought my way out, but my royal guard, my clutch sisters, they were all slain. Her voice broke on the last words. A single, silvery tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She cannot hold the throne without the genetic keys, Xylia continued, her voice hardening again. They are bonded to the matriarchal line. They are in my blood. That is why Genesis hunts me. They want to extract the keys from me so they can give Zora legitimate rule and plunder our world without opposition. Rorik finished reassembling his rifle. He looked at her, at the firelight dancing in her silver eyes. He saw the weight of a dying world on her shoulders. We can't run forever, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I know, she replied. They have a local command center, he said. In the old Genesis spire. Downtown. A new light entered her eyes. A spark of hope. A flare of warrior's fire. If we could get in, she began. If I could access their central comm system, I could bypass Zora's blockade. I could send a message to my loyalists. It's a fortress, Rorik said. Fortresses can be broken, she countered, her chin lifting. Rorik looked at her, at the unwavering resolve on her face. He thought of his empty life before she had crashed into it. The gray, meaningless routine. He had been waiting to die. Now, for the first time in years, he had a reason to live. A reason to fight. All right, he said. We stop running. A slow smile spread across her face. It transformed her, erasing the lines of pain and exhaustion. We will not run, she said, her voice ringing with renewed power. We will make them bleed. The Genesis spire was a needle of black glass and steel that pierced the smog-choked sky. Getting in was supposed to be impossible. Rorik used his old military access codes, long dormant but never fully deactivated, to slice through the lower levels of digital security. Xylia used a piece of Cathar tech, a small device she'd salvaged from her tunic, to create a localized stealth field that bent light and sound around them. They went up through the maintenance shafts, a silent, vertical ascent through the building's guts. It was a ballet of stealth and precision. His knowledge of human security systems, her alien technology. They were two halves of a perfect weapon. They reached the upper levels, the corporate offices. Sterile white corridors, holographic advertisements on the walls. Their luck ran out on the 70th floor. A patrol of enforcers, earlier than their schedule dictated. The stealth field flickered and died, its power cell depleted. They were discovered. The alarm blared, a jarring, synthetic scream. Red lights flashed, lockdown shutters slammed into place. The fight was on. It was a running gun battle through the pristine offices of middle management. Rorik laid down a field of suppressive fire, his rifle barking, sending kinetic rounds tearing through the thin cubicle walls. Enforcers dropped, their white armor stained with red. Xylia was a whirlwind of motion. Her energy whip was a living thing, a serpent of light that disarmed, disabled, and destroyed. She moved with an otherworldly grace, her body a blur. They fought back to back, a seamless dance of violence. He covered her flank, she protected his. He would call out targets, and she would eliminate them before he finished the sentence. "To high left," he yelled. Her whip cracked, and two enforcers on an upper gantry fell, their plasma rifles clattering to the floor. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they were better. They were a synergistic unit of destruction, cutting a swath through the corporate army. They fought their way to the top floor. The penthouse. The executive suite. Rorik kicked the double doors open. The room was vast, a cavern of chrome and glass, with a panoramic view of the rain-lashed city. And in the center of the room, she stood waiting. Zora. She looked like Xylia's shadow. The same tall, powerful frame, the same angular face. But her skin was paler, her markings a sickly gray. Her eyes were not silver, but a flat, dull pewter. She was flanked by two massive guards in obsidian Cathar armor, wielding crackling energy pikes. "Sister," Zora said. her voice a silken mockery of Xylia's. I knew you would come. You were always so predictable. Zora, Xylia breathed, her voice tight with rage. You have betrayed our people. You have sold our birthright. I have secured our future, Zora snapped. An alliance with a superior power. You were too blind, too tied to the old ways to see it. She looked past Xylia, her gaze falling on Rorik. A sneer twisted her lips. And you have brought a pet with you, she said. A primitive human. How far the mighty have fallen. He is more honorable than any Cathar who stands with you, Xylia retorted, raising her whip. Enough talk, Zora said, gesturing to her guards. Kill the animal. Bring my sister to me. The obsidian guards charged. Rorik met them head-on. He fired his rifle, but the round sparked harmlessly off their advanced armor. He dodged a sweeping strike from an energy pike, the weapon's tip leaving a scorched trail on the marble floor. These were not human soldiers. They were Cathar elite, fast, strong, and deadly. While Rorik engaged the guards, the two sisters faced each other. It was a storm of light and fury. Xylia's whip against Zora's, a matched weapon of equal power. Their movements were a blur, a dance of deadly precision they must have learned together as children. Rorik fought with grim determination. He managed to get inside one guard's reach, driving a combat knife into the unarmored joint at the back of his knee. The Cathar roared in pain and stumbled. Rorik used the opening to slam the butt of his rifle into the guard's helmet, stunning him. The second guard brought his pike around, aiming for Rorik's head. Rorik ducked, the energy blast searing the air above him. He was outmatched. He looked over at the sisters' duel. Xylia was gaining the upper hand. Her movements were more fluid, her strikes more powerful. Zora was tiring, her face a mask of hate and desperation. In a final, desperate move, Zora feinted, creating an opening. But not for an attack on Xylia. She spun, her whip lashing out not at her sister, but at Rorik. Xylia cried out a warning. Rorik saw it coming. The brilliant line of energy hurtling toward him. He couldn't dodge in time. He had a split second to make a choice. He didn't hesitate. He threw himself sideways. Not away from the blast, but in front of Xylia. The energy whip struck him across the side, its immense power tearing through his armor as if it were paper. The pain was absolute. A white-hot, searing agony that consumed his entire being. He felt his ribs crack, his flesh cook. He was thrown across the room like a rag doll, slamming into a glass wall that spiderwebbed from the impact. He collapsed to the floor, his vision swimming in a sea of red. The last thing he heard before the darkness took him was Xylia's scream. A scream that was not of pain, but of pure, unrestrained fury. A queen's rage. The rage of a goddess of war. When consciousness returned, it was in fragments. Pain. The low hum of advanced technology. A cool hand on his brow. He forced his eyes open. The ceiling was a soft, glowing white. He was in a medical bay, the kind he hadn't seen since his military days, only far more advanced. He tried to sit up, but a wave of agony shot through his side. Do not move, a familiar voice commanded softly. He turned his head. Xylia was sitting in a chair beside his bed. She wore a simple, dark tunic, her hair loose around her shoulders. The weariness was gone from her face, replaced by a calm strength. Zora, he rasped, his throat dry. Is in chains, Xylia said, her voice firm. Her Genesis allies are shattered. My loyalists have retaken the spire. Victory. They had won. He sank back into the pillows, a wave of relief washing over him. You were foolish, she said, her silver eyes fixed on him. Part of my charm, he managed to say. She didn't smile. She reached out and gently touched the side of his chest, where a glowing, intricate sigil was now imprinted on his skin. It pulsed with a soft, warm light. What is this? He asked. It is a bond, she said. The mark of the matriarch's consort. It saved your life. It linked your life force to mine, allowing my own vitality to heal you. Rorik stared at the mark, then at her. Consort. The word hung in the air. I held a system-wide broadcast, she continued, her gaze unwavering. From the spire. I showed our people the truth of Zora's betrayal, and I showed them the human who stood with me when all others had fallen. He remembered the public declaration, the formalization. He had heard it in his dreams, in the haze of his recovery. Her voice, ringing with power and conviction, claiming him before her entire race. He fought for me, she said, her voice taking on that same regal tone. He bled for me. He is mine, as I am his. She leaned closer, her face just inches from his. He is my shield, my blade, my consort, she whispered, her eyes searching his. To defy him is to defy me. Rorik was speechless. He, a broken soldier from a forgotten slum, was now the consort to an alien queen. You didn't have to do that, he said finally. Yes, she said, her voice softening. I did. It was the only way to ensure your safety. To give you status among my people. To bind you to me, permanently. It wasn't a political move. It was a declaration. A public sealing of the bond that had been forged in violence, tempered in desperation, and consummated in passion. Weeks later, he was on his feet again. The Cathar medical technology had healed his wounds, leaving behind only a faint scar and the glowing sigil on his chest. He stood beside Xylia on the observation deck of the spire, which now served as her provisional seat of power. The city spread out below them, a sprawling, cyberpunk metropolis under a perpetual twilight. She now wore the formal robes of the Cathar matriarch, but she stood as she always had, a warrior, proud and unyielding. We have much to do, she said, looking out at the city. We must root out the last of Genesis's influence, stabilize my rule, and begin the long process of healing our world. Sounds complicated, Rorik said, his hands shoved in the pockets of the new, dark fatigues he wore. She turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. I have a competent advisor, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Who's the lucky guy? Her smile widened. She took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. Her grip was strong, certain, a promise. Things are going to get complicated, he said again, his voice serious this time. He looked from their joined hands to her silver eyes. The eyes of the queen who had claimed him. The eyes of the woman who had remade his world. We are complicated, she replied, her voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through him. And we are ready. Together, they turned to face the sprawling city, a new day, and the uncertain future. They were ready. A queen and her consort. A warrior and his shield. Two broken pieces that had, against all odds, found a way to become whole. Their reign had just begun.